Welcome back to the podcast. Today feels different in a good way. We're not just talking about a book we enjoyed, we're talking about a book that complicates admiration. Bruce Springsteen's Autobiography is one of those rare works that invites praise and doubt at the same time. Chris, I'm really glad you're here for this.
Thanks, David. I agree. This isn't a comfort read Autobiography. It doesn't let you stay passive. Even when it inspires you, it also interrogates you.
Exactly. And I want to be clear from the start, this conversation isn't about dismantling Springsteen or idolizing him. It's about sitting inside the tension the book creates. Because he doesn't present a clean success story. He presents a life that's constantly negotiating with itself.
That negotiation is the core of the book. He's never at rest. Even moments that should feel triumphant are framed as provisional, like they could collapse if he stops paying attention.
Let's start that. When you finished the book, what lingered the most for you?
A sense of vigilance. That's the word that kept coming back. Bruce lives as if something essential could be lost at any moment. His talent, his audience, his meaning. The entire structure of his life feels designed to prevent disappearance.
That's interesting because vigilance can look like dedication from the outside, but internally it can feel like fear.
Exactly. And the book often blurs that line. He celebrates discipline constantly. Discipline saved him. Discipline gave him control. Discipline built the shows, the albums, the legacy. But discipline can also be a response to chaos, not freedom from it.
So you're saying the discipline isn't neutral?
Not at all. It's protective, it's armor. And armor always weighs something.
That weight seems to originate very early, especially with his father. The father figure is almost mythic in the book. Silent, volatile, intimidating. Do you think Bruce ever stops trying to resolve that relationship?
No. I think the entire career is an extended response to that presence. The father represents judgment without explanation. Bruce spends his life trying to answer a question that was never fully asked.
Which might explain why his music is so declarative. So much of it says, this is who I am, this is what I stand for.
Yes, because silence was the original threat. His father didn't offer feedback, just atmosphere. That forces a child to perform louder, clearer, harder.
He eventually arrives at compassion for his father, especially when he understands his father's mental illness. Did that resolution feel convincing to you?
Emotionally convincing, yes. Structurally convincing, I'm not sure. Understanding doesn't undo the internal architecture built in childhood. You can forgive someone and still inside the habits their presence created.
So forgiveness doesn't mean freedom.
Exactly. It means context. And context helps, but it doesn't dissolve reflexes.
That leads to something I kept wondering while reading. Bruce is incredibly self-aware. He names his fears, his depression, his compulsions. Do you think awareness actually changes him, or does it just help him manage himself better?
That's one of my biggest doubts about the book. Awareness gives him language, but it doesn't fundamentally alter the engine. The engine still runs on urgency, validation, and control.
That's subtle but important. It suggests growth without transformation.
Yes, evolution, not rebirth.
He talks openly about depression, therapy, medication. Many readers see that as a major strength of the book. I do too. But I also noticed how he frames depression almost like an external force to be restrained. Did you notice that?
Very much. Depression is something to be managed so the work can continue. It's not integrated into his worldview. It's treated like weather, not terrain.
Which implies that productivity remains the primary goal.
Always. Work is the organizing principle. Work stabilizes identity. Work justifies existence.
Here's an uncomfortable question then. If Bruce couldn't work, couldn't perform, couldn't produce, who would he be?
I don't think the book gives us an answer. And that absence is telling. His worth is deeply entangled with output.
That's a dangerous lesson for readers, especially younger ones.
It is, unless it's read critically. Otherwise, it risks suggesting that suffering is acceptable as long as it produces something admired.
And that brings us to the myth of the artist. Bruce is acutely aware that he's become a symbol. He both critiques that and leans into it. Did you feel like the book dismantles the myth or reinforces it in a more sophisticated way?
I think it refines it. The myth becomes one of self-awareness. He's not the knave rock god anymore. He's the reflective craftsman who knows the cost. That's still a powerful myth.
So even confession becomes part of the legend.
Yes, especially when it's this articulate.
Let's talk about his relationship to the working class stories he tells. He admits he didn't live many of those lives directly. He imagined them. How did you feel about that admission?
I appreciated the honesty, but the tension remains. Imagination can create empathy, but it can also flatten complexity. When your voice is that loud, it can overshadow the people you're imagining.
Yet those songs meant something real to real people.
Absolutely. Impact matters. But impact doesn't erase power imbalance. Both things can be true.
He often describes his concerts as communal rituals, almost sacred spaces. Do you think he believes that?
I do. But I also think those rituals serve him as much as the audience. They confirm that the story still holds, that the struggle has meaning.
So the audience isn't just receiving something.
They're completing something.
Which leads me to an imaginary scenario. If Bruce were suddenly playing to half-empty rooms, not because he failed, but because culture moved on, do you think his sense of meaning would survive intact?
I think it would shake him deeply. Not fatally, but fundamentally. Because the external confirmation matters more than he sometimes admits.
And that dependence complicates the image of self-made resilience.
Yes, resilience here is relational, not solitary.
Before we move further, I want to pause on masculinity. The book is saturated with endurance, toughness, pushing through. Even vulnerability feels framed as something you earn. Did you notice that?
Very clearly. Vulnerability arrives after achievement, not before. You're allowed to break once you've proven you can carry the weight,
Which quietly suggests that those who break earlier are weaker.
or less worthy of being heard.
That's a heavy implication.
It is. And I don't think Bruce intends it consciously. But intention doesn't erase influence.
That influence becomes even more complicated when you look at how Bruce frames endurance as virtue. He often implies that staying power is moral strength. But endurance can also be inertia. How did you read that?
I struggled with it. Endurance is celebrated almost without question in the book. Staying, persisting, holding the line. But there's very little space given to the idea that leaving, stopping, or changing direction might also be courageous. In his world, quitting feels like erasure.
And that makes sense if you grew up in a household where silence and withdrawal felt like annihilation.
Exactly. If presence was inconsistent, then disappearance becomes the ultimate threat. You survive by making yourself unavoidable.
Which might explain the scale of everything. The long concerts, the maximal effort, the refusal to give anything less than everything. It's not just generosity, it's self-preservation.
Yes, he overwhelms the void before it can speak.
There's a moment in the book where he talks about feeling fraudulent, like he's pretending to be something bigger than he is. Many readers see that as humility. Did you?
Partly. But I also saw it as another layer of performance. The confession of fraudulence actually reinforces the myth. It says, even with doubt, look at what I've built. The insecurity becomes proof of depth.
So self-doubt doesn't undermine authority, it enhances it.
When you're already powerful, yes, doubt humanizes you without destabilizing your position.
That's such a sharp distinction. It made me think about how carefully calibrated his openness is. He reveals pain, but rarely confusion about direction.
Yes, he's rarely lost. He's troubled, tormented, anxious, but always moving forward. The narrative never allows him to drift aimlessly.
Which raises the question of how much of that is true to life and how much is narrative discipline.
Probably both. But the discipline of the story mirrors the discipline of the life. Loose ends are dangerous.
Let's talk about love and relationships. He writes about his marriages with honesty, especially about his own emotional limitations. Did you feel like he fully interrogated his role in those failures?
He takes responsibility, but within a framework that still prioritizes the work. The implication is often, I failed here because the work demanded something else. That may be true, but it also subtly justifies the imbalance.
So the work remains the immovable center.
Always. Everything else orbits it.
Another imaginary situation. If Bruce had been forced to choose between being present as a partner and sustaining the level of artistic output he demanded of himself, do you think he would have chosen presence?
I think earlier in life, absolutely not. Later, maybe he would tell himself he would. But I'm not sure the internal machinery would allow it. Presence requires stillness, and stillness threatens him.
That connects to how he writes about happiness. Happiness in the book often feels retrospective, almost analytical. It's something he recognizes after the fact.
Yes, happiness is something he identifies once it's been converted into meaning, rarely something he simply inhabits.
Which might explain why joy in his writing often feels communal rather than private.
Exactly. Joy happens on stage in shared moments in the roar of recognition. Private joy is quieter and less documented.
Let's shift to the E Street Band. He writes about them with deep affection, almost reverence. Yet he's also undeniably the leader. How did you read that dynamic?
As genuine love within a hierarchy, he needs them. But he also needs control. The band offers continuity, history, and witnesses. They remember him before the myth hardened.
Which might be why losing band members hits him so deeply.
Yes, those losses aren't just personal, they're existential. Each loss removes a mirror that reflected a truer, earlier self.
There's grief in those passages that feels different from the rest of the book.
Because grief disrupts control. You can't outwork it. You can't rehearse it away.
And yet even grief eventually becomes integrated into the narrative.
Because it has to. The story must continue.
That insistence on continuation feels almost defiant, as if stopping would validate the fears he's been running from his entire life.
Yes. Stopping would feel like conceding to the darkness.
Let's return to depression for a moment. He describes moments where it descends suddenly without warning. Did you feel the book allowed enough space for how destabilizing that truly is?
Not fully. The descriptions are honest, but quickly followed by solutions. Therapy, medication, structure. There's little dwelling in the chaos itself.
Which might make readers underestimate how consuming it can be.
Exactly. It risks presenting depression as something you manage efficiently if you're disciplined enough.
And discipline becomes the moral answer again.
Yes, which can feel alienating to those whose depression doesn't respond to structure.
Despite all this, the book clearly means a great deal to people. It's helped readers feel seen, understood, motivated. How do we hold that impact alongside these critiques?
By refusing to flatten the conversation. A book can be meaningful and flawed at the same time. Influence doesn't require perfection.
That feels important, because critique isn't rejection.
Exactly, it's engagement.
Another question I kept circling. Bruce often frames his life as a series of choices. But how much choice did he really have once the identity took hold?
That's the paradox. Early choices solidify into constraints. At some point, you're maintaining rather than choosing.
So freedom narrows as success expands.
Yes. The higher the stakes, the fewer exits feel possible.
Which complicates the idea of success as liberation.
It does. Success can be a very elegant cage.
Do you think Bruce recognizes that?
Intellectually, yes. Emotionally, I'm not sure he can afford to.
because questioning the cage too deeply might destabilize everything it holds.
Exactly. The structure protects him, even as it confines him.
Let's talk about legacy. The book is clearly written with an awareness of posterity. Did you feel like he was speaking to the future as much as the present?
Very much so. It's a self-portrait meant to last, which means certain ambiguities are preserved rather than resolved.
So the book isn't a conclusion.
No, it's a carefully positioned moment in an ongoing story.
If the message were misread as a prescription rather than a reflection, what do you think would be the risk?
That people would believe relentless striving is the only path to meaning. That rest is indulgence. That pain is productive by default.
And yet, there's something undeniably moving about his commitment.
Of course, commitment is powerful. The danger is confusing power with universality.
Before we move into the final stretch, I want to ask you this. Do you think Bruce Springsteen is at peace?
I think he's more at peace than he used to be. But peace for him is active. It's something he maintains, not something he rests inside.
So peace is another form of work.
Yes, just a quieter one.
That might be the most Springsteen answer possible. That idea of peace as work keeps echoing for me because it suggests that stillness is never entirely safe for him. Even calm has to be structured. And that makes me wonder whether the book ever truly allows him to stop being the narrator of his own life.
I don't think it does. Even when he describes moments of rest, they're framed in retrospect, filtered through explanation. He's always interpreting himself, rarely just existing on the page.
Which is ironic because music is often described as a way to escape language, to feel something directly. Yet his relationship to music feels incredibly verbal, analytical, almost managerial.
That's true. He dissects inspiration rather than surrendering to it. There's very little mysticism. Everything is earned, crafted, explained. Magic exists, but only after effort.
That approach demystifies talent in a way that's empowering, but it also removes space for grace.
Yes. Grace implies receiving something you didn't build yourself. And receiving is harder than doing when you've learned that survival depends on effort.
I want to return briefly to the idea of the American dream because Bruce is often seen as one of its great narrators. The book both affirms and complicates that idea. How did you read his relationship to it?
I think he believes in the dream emotionally, but not literally. He knows the system fails many people. Yet he also embodies the myth of upward escape. That contradiction sits unresolved.
Do you think his success risks validating a system that didn't work for most people like him?
It can, if read simplistically, his story can be weaponized as proof that effort alone is enough. But the book itself contains enough nuance to resist that if readers are willing to engage with it critically.
That critical engagement requires slowing down, which ironically runs against the book's ethos of constant motion.
Yes, the book invites reflection but models relentless drive.
Another imaginary scenario, if Bruce had never become famous but still wrote songs privately, still wrestled with meaning, still lived a quieter life, do you think he would see that life as valid?
Intellectually, he might say yes. Emotionally, I think he would feel something essential was missing. Recognition isn't incidental to his sense of self. It's formative.
That dependence on being seen feels both human and precarious.
It is. And it's something many artists share but rarely admit so openly.
As the book moves toward later life, there's a noticeable shift in tone. Less urgency, more reflection. Did you feel that shift was earned?
Yes, but it's cautious. The urgency never disappears, it just softens. He allows himself some gentleness, but within familiar structures.
Almost like he's learned to lower the volume without turning off the engine.
Exactly. Silence is still dangerous.
What did you make of his reflections on mortality?
They felt honest but restrained. Death is acknowledged, not dwelled in. He focuses more on legacy than on oblivion.
legacy being another form of continuity.
Yes, another way to not disappear.
If the book has a blind spot, what would you say it is?
The possibility that a life doesn't need to be monumental to be meaningful. He gestures toward that idea, but never fully inhabits it.
That's powerful, because monumentality has been the organizing principle from the start.
And stepping away from that would require trusting that he's enough without the scaffolding.
Which brings us to the final question I want to ask you. After reading this book, do you envy Bruce Springsteen?
No, I admire him deeply. I'm grateful for his work, but I don't envy the internal cost. The constant vigilance, the fear of vanishing, the pressure to justify existence through output. That's a heavy price.
I feel the same. The book didn't make me want his life. It made me want to examine my own definitions of success more carefully.
And that might be its greatest gift.
So if someone listens to this conversation having never read the book, what would you want them to understand before they do?
That this is not a simple triumph narrative. It's a study in tension between art and self, ambition and peace, myth and humanity.
And that admiration doesn't require imitation.
Exactly. You can honor the work without inheriting the wounds.
That feels like the right place to land, not with answers, but with better questions.
Springsteen would probably approve of that.
Chris, thank you for staying in the complexity with me all the way through.
Thank you, David. These are the conversations that matter.
And everyone listening, thanks for giving this the time it deserves. We'll see you next time.